Hi, welcome back to Lady Lovestead Reads. My name is Jessica, and this is my April 2023 reading wrap-up. I feel awkward on camera today. Why am I feeling awkward on camera? That hasn't happened in a while. Let's start with just some general April stats of my reading notebook here. In April, I read 11 books. 4 of them came from my own bookshelf, 3 from KU, 6 from audiobooks, and the rest were library books. So I'm trying to read this year 38% of my owned TBR. And at the start of April, I had 795 owned books. That is my physical bookshelf and ebooks combined, and had read 222 of them. I hauled 7 books, so I ended up with 802 books on my bookshelf. Oh my gosh. And have read 225 of them. So in April, my read to unread ratio was 28% read, and it stayed the same by the end of the month. 28% read, because for every book I read, I seem to buy a new one. In terms of genre, I read 2 contemporary, 2 mysteries or thrillers, 3 fantasy, 2 horror, and 3 romance. And genre can overlap, so if the numbers don't math correctly on that, that's why. I read for audience 1 middle grade, 1 young adult, and 9 adult books. For rating, I had 1 1-star, 0 2-stars, 3 3-stars, 3 4-stars, and 2 5-stars, and 2 DNFs. The oldest book I read was published in 2015, and the newest book I read was published this year in 2023. 4 of the authors were BIPOC authors, so I'd like to read at least half of authors. I would like at least half of what I read to be written by BIPOC authors. So for April, the percentage was 36% of the authors were BIPOC, but my total for the year is, of all 39 books I had read up to this point, 17 were by BIPOC authors for a percentage of 43%, so very close to 50%. My favorite book from the month was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. So if you're new here, I've started doing my monthly wrap-ups by playing the game MASH. MASH is a game that we used to play as kids in the 90s. It's a numbers game that basically predicts your future, like what kind of house you're going to live in, who your partner will be, how many kids you'll have, what kind of car you'll drive, all of that. So the 4 areas that I focus on are house, meaning the setting of the novel, love interest, and family, meaning, what friend group or family would I want to be a part of, and then job or career. So what job would I want to have? I draw 4 books out of my apothecary jar, and I decide, which of those 4 areas I would want for those books. And that's how we go through them and talk about them. So for the first round, we've got 3 Keys by Kelly Yang, Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter, Weyward by Amelia Hart, and Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nevo. Okay, I need to think about this for a second. Okay, I got it. So let's start with Weyward. I read this book as part of Brittany's Patreon buddy read. I'm not actually one of her Patreon patrons, but I had this book on my shelf, and in one of her videos I saw that they were reading it in April, so I read it. And it's Brittany from Books with Brittany. So Weyward is kind of a historical fantasy, and there's 3 different timelines. One is set during the witch trials, one is set in our current timeline, and one is set during World War II. And all of the women on each timeline are connected. It's like their lineage or their family history. And they all have witchcraft like in their bloodline. And so it talks about how that's handled at each of these time periods. And there's like different stories in each, and then they all end up intertwined toward the end. And this book is very much like no plot, just vibes. It's very character driven. It's a very character study. It's a character study of these 3 women and their lives and their connections to each other. And it talks a lot about toxic masculinity in each of the eras and the importance of women having relationships with other women, not just romantically, but like just having the support system of other strong women. I don't think that this book is going to land for a lot of people because it does focus heavily on psi women, so cis women, and it focuses on white women. Like, this is very much a white woman's experience kind of a story. But it worked for me. I absolutely loved it. I loved the focus on family history and ancestry and discovering who you are by understanding your lineage. I loved the focus on the power of femininity, feral femininity, like the divine feminine. I loved the focus on that. There are a lot of things that just really hit for me. And I really, really liked this book. I gave it 4 stars, I believe. Let me double check. Weyward. Yes, this was a 4-star read. But as I said, I don't think it's going to hit for a lot of people. I think a lot of people are not going to enjoy this, both because it's a very white woman story and because it's not got a lot of plot. It really is slow, kind of plotting at times. There are some triggers in it. I just don't think people are going to love it. But I loved it. What I chose for this was house, or the setting, because I really would love to live in that cottage with the woman that's on the present day timeline. She goes and she stays in this cottage called Weyward. And she grows her own food in a garden, and she works part-time in a bookstore, and like is one with nature and is safe, and like that is the life. Next we'll go with Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nevo. This is a novella. It's a fantasy heavy on like mythology and folklore, and it's pretty hard to understand, actually. It's very symbolic. I want to say it's like a larger allegory for something. Of what exactly, I'm not entirely sure. But it's about an empress. And so basically there's this person whose job is to like document history. And so they go to the home of this empress and they start going through all of their documents and their clothing and all of this stuff to catalog it and to document the history. And one of the housekeepers there tells the story of each item, and that's about it. I don't know. I didn't love it. I gave this 3 stars. I felt like as I was reading it, I was enjoying the reading experience, but after I finished reading it, I just didn't feel like it had much of an impact on me. It's very beautifully written, but I don't know. It's not one that I think I'll ever reread, and I do not plan to continue the series because it is a series of stories. So for this, I picked Romantic Partner because the Empress in this, it has a sapphic relationship, and she's pretty cool character. So yeah, Romantic Partner it up. Next, for job, I chose Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. This is a dark, dark thriller. And it is about this family whose oldest daughter goes missing, and there's a lot of fallout in the family as a result of that. The youngest sister and her husband are mugged, and her husband is killed in this situation. And it brings the family back together to try to figure out like what's going on here. And she uncovers a lot of really dark things about her husband on her husband's computer. And it leads them down this really intense path of just learning more about him and what happened to their older sister. And it is a very dark and disturbing story, but it's so well done, and it's such an important story to exist. I gave it 5 stars. It was my favorite book of the month. I can't say I enjoyed it because it is so like gruesome. And it's not even like the body horror that makes it gruesome and difficult. It's just the horror of what happens and knowing that stuff like this actually happens in the world to vulnerable women and girls. And it's a very difficult read, but it's a very important read, and it's one that will definitely stick with me. I gave it 5 stars. And for MASH, I chose Job for that one because one of the sisters is a dog groomer, and I could do that. I don't want to be in the setting of that one, that's for sure. And then the last one for this round is 3 Keys by Kelly Yang. This one I read as part of the Middle Grade Appreciation Society book club, which is the middle grade book club that I host. And it's book 2 in the Front Desk series. One of the things that Kelly Yang does really, really well in her stories is touch on some pretty dark and heavy topics in a way that's still age appropriate. So in this installment, it really focuses a lot on immigration, particularly folks immigrating from South and Central America into the U.S. and being undocumented, and the dreamers, and all the complications and discrimination and difficulties that people in those situations face. So that was really the main focus of it. It was very well done. I love the characters in this. They're so lovable, and they develop nicely throughout the course of the story. They learn some important lessons. They achieve some really heartwarming things. For MASH, I picked Friend Group because they have just the sweetest little friend group between not just the kids, but the adults in the kids' life as well that live at the hotel, or their teachers, and other community members that just really come together to support them and to support Mia in particular in this story. So that is the one I would pick for family or friend group. I gave this 4 stars, by the way. On to the next round. I think we'll do 3 rounds because I had almost enough for 3. Okay, so first is Velvet Was the Night by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. Happy Hour by Marlo Granados. And The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Alright, I got it. So first, Velvet Was the Night by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is a noir story, actually, and it is about Mexico in the 1970s when there was like the Red Scare going on. Basically, everybody was really afraid of communists, and there was like these uprisings and et cetera, et cetera. And what happens in this story is it focuses on Maite. She's the main character, and she agrees to babysit her neighbor's cat, or cat sit her neighbor's cat. And her neighbor never comes back when she said she was going to come back. So she's stuck with this cat. She's going around trying to find like, where is this neighbor person? Because I'm not taking care of this cat. And she ends up on an adventure because this neighbor was into some political things and there's a lot of folks after her, basically. And so she ends up going on this grand adventure of like figuring out who the neighbor knew and what to do about it and yada yada yada. I gave this book 3 stars. I really thought that she did such an excellent job of developing an atmosphere. Like you could feel the heat in the air, you could feel the dust in the air. Like it was a really atmospheric read. I personally am just not a big fan of noir. Like I don't really like noir films. And so this was my first noir novel, and I just don't really care for this style. But if you really like noir, you might very much enjoy this. I think it was a well done story for what it is, for the genre that it is. And Sylvia Moreno Garcia is obviously a really talented writer. It just wasn't the book for me. I gave it 3 stars. For MASH, I picked house or setting because, again, the book was so atmospheric and it'd be really interesting to be in Mexico at this time and experience some of those historical things that are happening. So setting for that one. Next, The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. This is the first book in the Dreamland Billionaires series, and it is about a family that owns what is essentially Disneyland, or the Disney company, and the grandfather dies and now he's got an inheritance to hand over. And then the love interest, she is an employee and they're at a meeting and she has this big idea about something. So she ends up working on the creators team, where you basically come up with ideas for how to make the company run better. And the guy who's supposed to become the new CEO falls for her. It's not great. I DNF'd it. I think what killed it for me was just the writing style. The story itself isn't terrible, but the writing style was just too cheesy for me. It felt really immature too, just kind of cheesy and immature, and it was enough to pull me out of the story. Sometimes I really like that. Sometimes cheesy and immature is great, depending on what the story is and what it's pitched as. But I don't know, it didn't work for me. I read this with the girls at the Lair. I shouldn't say girls. I read this with the fellow vamps at the Lair because there's all genders at the Lair. But they really liked it. I did not. I didn't really like it. I'm glad that other people can enjoy it though. And if you enjoy that one, I'm happy for you. It wasn't for me. It was a DNF. But for MASH, I picked job because I think being a creator sounds really cool, because basically you just brainstorm new ideas all week and present your ideas at the end of the week. Like, I could totally do that. That sounds fun. Happy Hour by Marlo Granados. This is lit fic. It's within the realm of what I would call sad girl lit fic or women against the void. And it's about these two 20-year-olds with, 20-something-year-olds who live in New York City, and they basically just bum off other people to survive. They have a small business where they sell fashion that they curate from different places, but mostly they're just bumming off other people to get by, and they're kind of in the party scene. And it really reminds me of Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23, if you've ever watched that show. But a more literary version of that show, like touching on some deeper topics. It really does touch on some, again, issues of immigration and being undocumented and finding work, and it really talks a lot about art and pretension, and it was really, really good. I absolutely loved this book, and I identified with it at a lot of points because I was kind of a scenester and kind of someone who was into living the way these gals lived when I was in my 20s. I grew out of it, but it just was so fun to sort of revisit that mindset and to revisit some of the philosophy and some of the just lifestyle things that you do when you're in a scene like that. So I gave this novel 5 stars, and I would pick for MASH friend or family group for this because I just would love to be friends with Isa, or Issa. Issa's my jam. I would be her best friend and have such a good time with her. Okay, and last for this round, The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This is a booktube, darling. You probably already know what it's about, but it is a fantasy. It gets pitched a lot as a middle grade fantasy. I don't think it's a middle grade. I think this is an adult fantasy. It's just cozy. So it's a cozy fantasy about an orphanage that houses magical kids, and this social worker goes there to make sure everything is functioning smoothly and ends up falling in love with someone there and like falling in love with the kids, and it's a very sweet, cozy story. I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. I know that there is some controversy around TJ Klune as an author, particularly around this story, because it connects to the way Indigenous children in Canada were rounded up and sent to homes. So, definitely do your research on that to see if that is something that would bother you or trigger you. And just go from there. Know that that's a controversy. Make your own decision about supporting the author or not supporting the author. I did enjoy the story. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. But having read it a month ago and having had time to let time pass, I haven't really thought about it a whole lot since I read it. So, take that for what you will. For MASH, I decided to go with romantic interest because Arthur is such a sweetheart. And, I would love to be with someone like Arthur. All right, last round. We have A House at the Bottom of the Lake. Okay, no, that was my least favorite book of the month, if you saw the vlog. Preacher Man by Jessica Cain, and my other DNF, I bet. Yep, Indigo Ridge by Brittany Books. Oh boy. This is a hard one because I DNF'd one. Another one's like super short, and I really disliked the third one. I don't want to do anything with any of these. Okay, let's start with A House at the Bottom of the Lake by Josh Malerman. This is horror, and it's about these teenagers who are 17 years old, and he repeats repeatedly that they are 17 years old. They go out to a lake, they go boating on the lake, and they discover a house in the bottom of the lake, just like the title suggests. They spend the whole book scuba diving and exploring the house that's supposedly haunted, and really not a lot happens. It's so boring, it's so cheesy, it's so terrible. There's some lines that make no logical sense, like someone gasping underwater without choking, like gasping in surprise, like, oh, underwater? Underwater? I hated that book. And Josh Malerman, I think, is just not the author for me because I've read another one of his and really didn't like it. I gave The House at the Bottom of the Lake 1 star. But for the MASH game, I would do Setting because that'd be kind of cool to explore a house in the bottom of the lake. Just the book wasn't cool. Okay. Preacher Man by Jessica Cain. This is an unhinged novella. It's like highly smutty, but it is about this guy who comes to a town to build a church. Why he decides to build a church, none of us know. And he builds a church and ends up being really attracted to one of his parishioners. He kind of stalks her, only she knows he's stalking her and she likes it. So they end up together. It's a very, very, very smutty time. There is daddy kink. There's praise kink. And that's about it. It's unhinged, as all of Jessica Cain's novellas are. I gave it 3 stars because it was an entertaining time. And for MASH, I guess I'll go with Job. Being a preacher would be okay. And then the last one, Indigo Ridge by Brittany Books. This one is set in like Wyoming or Montana or something like that. The main character is a police officer, and she has to solve a murder, and there's supposedly a romance involved in there. I did not get very far into this book before I realized, yeah, it's not for me, just based on the writing style again. Like, the writing style was very basic, very cheesy, made my eyes roll a lot. And as soon as my eyes start rolling, it's a pretty good sign to me that I need to just DNF the book. So I DNF'd it. Didn't get super far into it. And for MASH, I guess we'll go with romantic partner, because one of the men she runs into is a farmer, and farmers have horses, right? So we'll just go with that. Let me know down below if you have read any of these books, what you thought about them, if you agree or disagree of my assessment of them. Let me know if you have read them, if you would want to be in the setting, the friend group, the romantic relationship, or the job for that book. And if you just want to let me know that you're here, go ahead and leave me like the ocean wave emoji for House in the Cerulean Sea. And until next time, make sure that you continue to read good books, drink good coffee, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye!